we're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Friday, April 17th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. And joining us today is Kyun.
Thank you for having me.
For coming in today, also Brooks with us today.
Hello, happy to be here.
To have you, and both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's the end of the work week, which means it's time for our Friday debate where we tackle global issues that really hit home. And today's topic, life and death. So we're starting with the rising interest among Gen Z across the world in dying well, which means thinking ahead about how to live meaningfully and ultimately how to face the end of life with dignity and choice. So it may sound a little heavy, but let me ask you both, starting with you, Kyun, what would your ideal end to life be?
It's a very heavy question to ask on a Friday, when we all want to be happy and look forward to the weekend. But I think, to be born and to die, unless it's intended, is something humans have no choice or control over, unfortunately. And I think most people would feel very sad and even fearful when they think about death, even at a young age. As much as I don't want to think about it, the more I do, I just want my death to be like going to sleep like every other night, especially after I've had a very long day where I fall asleep immediately as I just did it. The painless death, yeah. Also, if there is a connection to well living and well dying, I would do my best to live a very well-lived life, just doing everything I can, the best of my capabilities. And I do know that some people want to live until they're like into their 80s or 90s, as long as they can. But for me, if I had a choice, I would rather live, I guess, a shortened life, maybe until like my 70s, in a healthy way. I don't want to be living till like 100, just being in hospital bed, just being alive, just being conscious without being able to actually do the things I actually used to do at a younger age. So I think if I did have a choice, I would choose just dying with less pain and severe illness at a much younger age.
You bring up a good point because a doctor once told me that people tend to live longer now because medical technology has improved, but people aren't as aware that the quality of life isn't that much greater. Like people live longer doesn't mean the quality of life has.
That's a very good point.
That is a good point. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to my best friend and I said something like, when I go take care of my cat, and mind you, my cat is almost 15 at this point. And she looked at me and she said, Brooke, don't you think you're going to outlive him?
Oh, that's true.
And it didn't occur to me because in my mind, he's always going to be next to me. We think of our pets as kind of
especially
immortal.
Like a cat.
Exactly.
I have 9 lives.
But the interesting thing is that might not be the case.
Right.
It's not like what I said was completely impossible because something could happen to me today, right? You never know what's going to happen. And so I think humans are all kind of naturally afraid of death. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Final Destination.
Right. The horror series.
Yes, so basically the characters can all see how they're going to go and they can't do anything to stop it. And ever since I saw that movie, I always am looking around and thinking, is this the day? Are these lights going to fall on me today?
It does sound a bit stressful.
It is very stressful, but I think obviously my ideal scenario would be more like Ki-hoon's, where I make it to old age and I go peacefully in my sleep, no pain. I think that's what everyone really wants. Something else I talked to her about was being on life support or not. I know that's another debate people have. For me, I think technology might be able to improve. So if it were feasible for my family, I would want to stay. But I know a lot of people think, no, I don't want that. It's all up to your personal preference. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the choice surrounding how you're going to leave this world.
Right, so as I also hinted earlier, we're diving into a global issue that sparked intense debate, euthanasia. So euthanasia is the act of intentionally ending a person's life to relieve suffering, often in cases of severe or incurable illness, and it raises complex questions about dignity, choice, and the value of life. And this debate isn't just theoretical, it's actually playing out in real life cases. So a recent case in Spain reignited this debate. So what happened, Kyun?
A highly contentious euthanasia case in Spain has come to an end this March, reigniting debate over assisted dying laws. Noelia Castillo, a 25-year-old woman from Barcelona, died by euthanasia after an 18-month legal battle with her father, who opposed her decision on the grounds of her mental health. Now, Castillo had been left paraplegic following a suicide attempt in 2022 and had long struggled with trauma, including sexual assault. Although Spanish authorities approved her request for assisted dying in 2024, the process was delayed after her father, supported by a conservative legal group, challenged the decision in court. The case ultimately reached the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled in Castillo's favor. In the end, Castillo exercised her legal right under Spain's 2021 euthanasia law. Her case marks the first time such a decision has been settled through the courts, raising complex questions about autonomy, mental health, and the role of family in end-of-life choices.
Hearing about this case, you talked about Final Destination earlier. You kind of reminded me of a movie called Me Before You. That's kind of about this as well. It's pretty similar. So after hearing about this specific case, where do you personally stand on euthanasia, Brooke?
Well, first I want to preface this by saying I understand that there are many nuanced opinions on this topic. It's extremely sensitive. There are religious beliefs at play as well. So I definitely want to get across that we here at NewsGen respect everyone's perspectives on this. I'm heartbroken, honestly, that we even have to talk about this case in particular, because it all stems from a woman going through extreme trauma to get to the point of feeling the need to make that final decision. So for those who do advocate for this voluntary euthanasia, kind of going with dignity, they say it's about autonomy and your own free will. And if we go to her words, Castillo said in an interview, "I just want to leave peacefully and stop the suffering." So for people in her position that are going through extreme trauma and emotional pain, to them, living is worse than death. And so I think it is valuable and important to listen to them and hear what they're actually feeling and going through, because to people like them, choosing a peaceful death is part of their right to self-determination and free will.
I think that's why it's such a heartbreaking case. So what are your thoughts on this?
There are some slightly differing perspectives that have stemmed from this incident, and one of them was saying that life is a coexistence of pain and joy.
Right.
And if you have the mindset to accept life being a very tough journey with bits and pieces of happiness and fulfillment on the way, it becomes a journey you want to embark on. And Castillo was only 25, so people were saying perhaps she was, I guess, too young to have given up on life. And it raises the question of whether she might have had more chances if given more time, something her father was desperately trying to do. But there are also concerns that once euthanasia becomes legal in more countries, death may be accepted a little too easily, potentially leading to a diminished respect for life. It could also place pressure on socially vulnerable groups, such as the elderly, and create situations where individuals choose death not entirely out of their own free will.
So it really comes down to autonomy versus the risk of social pressure. And that tension is becoming even more visible in other countries. So where is euthanasia among young people rising?
The Netherlands was the first country in the world to legalize euthanasia. However, concerns are growing continuously as the number of cases continue to rise, including among young people. And just last year, 30 individuals under the age of 30 chose euthanasia due to mental suffering. And in response, the head of the body responsible for overseeing euthanasia cases even questioned, are we still doing the right thing? So it's obviously contradicting the thought they actually, when they actually first started, after seeing so many young people choose euthanasia to end their life. And unlike physical sufferings, mental suffering is very difficult to measure in severity or predict in terms of recovery. And this raises concerns about whether society may be offering an option of death too easily to young people, because there is, I guess there is a solution to every problem, and some which may take much longer than others. But once you give up, especially when it comes to death, unfortunately, there is no second chance. There's no going back. I know it's much easier said than done, but I think trying to look ahead beyond the current situation you're in, looking on the positive side, trying to seek constructive help can perhaps eventually lead to a better situation and make that person a stronger version of themselves if they do fight through it.
I think that's exactly what's so shocking about this is that so many young people are choosing it. But like you said, it's like, again, easier said than done, but it sounds like it's important at the same time to have, like therapy sessions readily available for young people as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
Right. Well, I think for some people, they reach a level of suffering where they've lost that hope that there can be a solution to their particular problem. And I think it's important to talk about the differences between emotional pain and physical pain, right? With physical pain, injury, illness, we can often see that right in front of us. If someone's broken their arm, for example, we see a cast, we see what they're going through. It's very hard to know exactly what kind of pain and suffering someone is going through on the inside. And they can often feel like there is no cure for me. This isn't like a physical ailment where I can go to the doctor and they can just fix me. Of course, there's medicine, there's therapy, there is support out there for mental health issues, but some people get to a point where they just lose all hope that anything can be done for them. And so I do think we need to have a lot of compassion for those people. And I also want to point out that it's not an easy option, right? Even in the case we're looking at today, it took months and months to get to a point of a conclusion. So it's not like you can just walk into a clinic and ask for euthanasia and get it the next day, right? You have to go through the legal processes. There's criteria, there are safeguards. And like you said, only 30 people, 30, it's a lot of lives, obviously, but when you think about how many people there are in the world, 30 people successfully reaching that point means that they are taking the process seriously, and it's not just an easy option. You really have to go through all of the proper steps.
When I first thought about this topic, I was like, I don't know what's such a big debate around this, because like if someone's, for example, physically suffering, then maybe they should have the choice of ending that suffering. But like you said, it's not always obvious to see what the issue is and stuff.
Exactly.
So it is very complex, and there's no clear-cut answer to this. And as more countries face this, the debate is only getting more intense. So then that's why we also wanted to hear directly from our viewers. So we ran a poll on the Arirang News YouTube channel asking, what if a physically healthy and intelligent young person but with severe genetically induced depression wants to euthanize themselves? And here's what the results showed. And they show just how divided people are on this issue. 47% said it should not be allowed, while 30% said it should, and 23% remained neutral. So it really highlights how when it comes to mental suffering, public opinion becomes far more cautious and conflicted. So now let's bring the conversation a bit closer to home. So how is the debate around euthanasia evolving in Asia and also right here in Korea?
To talk about Asia first, no countries currently permit euthanasia, largely due to cultural and religious influences such as Confucianism and Buddhism, which make it very difficult to accept this notion. However, as South Korea enters a super aging society, public perception appears to be shifting. In fact, a survey released last year found that 76% of Koreans actually support euthanasia. And to back this, there have also been cases of individuals attempting to travel abroad to countries where euthanasia is legal, like in Switzerland. And recently, this was in the news, a man in his 60s living in Korea was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis and tried to board a flight to Switzerland through France for that purpose, but was persuaded by the police to return because his family members apparently saw a letter from him saying, I might not come back. So they immediately contacted the police. And one of the policemen were actually someone in their 60s as well. So that policeman was actually able to persuade this man to not take the flight, just come back to their family and I guess, receive more treatment if there is hope. So that was a case that clearly shows, I know it's just one case, one single case, but many Koreans actually, 76%,
That's a huge
it's a huge number. They're actually for euthanasia. So I guess, there are, differing perspectives, but Korea is kind of shifting towards that direction.
I think that's why it's such a slippery slope, because you also said earlier about how it can be a societal pressure. So having it allowed for older people would put so much pressure on them, as also obviously their family. So despite cultural resistance, public opinion does seem to be shifting, but this debate doesn't just affect the individual. So how does euthanasia affect not just individuals, but also their families as well?
So if the father had gone through with euthanasia, it could have left lasting trauma for the remaining family members.
Right.
And in a society, especially in Korea, where people are deeply interconnected among family members and just friends in general, an individual's death is not just solely a personal matter. It can have broader emotional and social repercussions, potentially affecting not just the family, but society as a whole. Now, in my case, my grandparents passed away in the hospital because of cancer. Now, even though they were constantly injected with painkillers, it seemed like they were in constant pain and slowly losing consciousness. But it wasn't really up to us to just let them go. So although it was heartbreaking to see them lying in bed helpless, but when the time actually came, it just seemed like they went into a very deep and even comfortable sleep. And despite each individual's different religious background, and all their beliefs, we all believe deep inside that they had finally been freed from this world into somewhere, I guess, a bit more peaceful, calm, and less painful.
I think that what's so complicated about this issue is that it really affects the people around them as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
Right, of course, it's devastating imagining any kind of loss in the family, and I'm sorry, Ki-hoon, for your loss as well. I've had losses in my family too from cancer. It's very hard to see your family going through suffering, and like I said earlier, emotional pain can be just as painful as that kind of physical suffering. So the question becomes, if someone is going through that, wouldn't it be better and more peaceful for them to go the way they would like to go? That is really the question. And if we go back to Castillo's words again, she actually wondered why her father even wanted to keep her alive when they barely spoke. She said, quote, "He ignores me. So why does he want me to be alive, to keep me in a hospital?" And so her point was that she didn't believe it was right for her to have to sacrifice her own happiness and just live the rest of her life in misery to appease and keep her family happy. And in fact, her mother actually supported her decision, even though it was very hard for her. She said she didn't agree with it necessarily, but she respected it. And I think that word respect is the most important thing in this conversation here. You might not agree, you might not understand why these conversations are happening or why people are making these decisions, but I think at the very core level, the fundamental human decency, you should try your best to respect the people that are in these very unfortunate circumstances.
Well said. So, all of this really captures the core tension here between the impact on loved ones and also the individual's right to choose. On one hand, death doesn't happen in isolation, and emotional consequences for families are very much real. But at the same time, it raises the question of whether someone should be expected to endure suffering for the sake of others. And that's why we asked our viewers, if euthanasia were legalized, would you choose it for yourself? And here's what they said. Interestingly, 45% said yes, while 23% said no. So what's striking here about the results is that nearly half say they would actually choose it for themselves, suggesting that when the question becomes personal, autonomy and control over one's own suffering carry quite a bit of weight. And also, before we wrap up, let's get your final thoughts on today's decision and the issue of euthanasia as a whole. So, Kyun, do you want to start?
In a hypothetical situation, if South Korea tries to legalize euthanasia in this country, I think as a nation, we need to take a step back and carefully look at the actual numbers and monitor the suicidal rate that's happening here in Korea. Korea is ranked the highest among OECD nations in terms of suicidal rate. We've talked about young people choosing euthanasia due to mental illness, but legalizing euthanasia would only exacerbate the suicidal rate, as it could give off an easy impression to death, especially for young people. Now, putting an end to one's life is not a solution or a cure for mental illness. Although it may seem like the best option for the person suffering, there is no definite yes or no answer, and it is a very sensitive issue, and it's different for everyone's case. So therefore, you should be treated with a lot of respect, like Brooke has been emphasizing throughout today's episode. And as other people, human beings, respect should be at the base, in the fundamental, and not become too judgmental in other people's choices, because although it contradicts what I say, we have no choice over our birth or death, but for people who are suffering so much, especially mentally, I guess they want to leave the world in a less painful, in a peaceful way. And for a family member to not accept that, and I think that's showing a lot of disrespect, because they're just caring about, oh no, I don't want you to leave, no matter how much you're suffering. But then if we think of in the perspective of the person actually suffering, which we'll never find out, to be honest, I think we can become, I guess, a bit more understanding in terms of, I guess, letting someone go in a more peaceful manner.
I think this topic is a classic example of this is definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution type of thing. And I like what you said about how for South Korea, it seems like maybe it's important to look at what the stats are for each country for South Korea, because all the societal rate among young people are already so high. Maybe the solution right now isn't to talk about this. It's more about finding how to have support ready more available for young people. And so what are your takes on this?
Well, today we had a very hard discussion. I've definitely felt kind of emotional throughout. But I think we tried our best to handle it delicately and with compassion. And I think that's the most important thing. We talked about respect, but also compassion and kindness. It's important to have these kinds of discussions, because this is a real topic that's relevant all around the world. In Korea, they're considering it as well. So I'm glad that we were able to have this discussion and that it was a productive one. And I hope that you all can kind of take inspiration from that and just remember to treat everyone with kindness and understanding.
Right. So today's discussion shows that euthanasia is not a simple yes or no issue, but one shaped by ethics, emotion, and personal experience. As societies continue to grapple with aging populations and changing values, this debate is only likely to grow more urgent, and ultimately it leaves us with a difficult question. How do we balance dignity in death with the value we place on life? And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back on Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Kyun.
It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you, and also Brooke.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this will inspire you not just about how life ends, but how we choose to live it. We are
News Generation.